My name is Jill Reynolds, 32 years old, and my world changed forever the day my grandfather Charles died unexpectedly in a helicopter crash. We always had a special bond that my parents resented. The day after the funeral, his lawyer revealed something nobody expected. I was the sole heir to his $800 million fortune. My family immediately demanded I hand everything over. When I refused to betray my grandfather's wishes, they kicked me out that night. Little did they know, Grandpa Charles had anticipated their reaction perfectly. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground against family pressure. Now, let me tell you how I went from being disowned to discovering who really deserves an inheritance. I grew up in San Francisco, California, in a home that looked perfect from the outside, but was constantly tense with financial arguments inside. My parents, William and Patricia, both worked respectable jobs. Dad was a mid-level manager at a tech company, and Mom was a real estate agent. Despite their decent incomes, they always seemed to be struggling financially. The new cars, expensive vacations, and designer clothes created an illusion of success, while credit card bills piled up behind closed doors. My grandfather Charles was different. He grew up dirt poor in rural Idaho, the son of a factory worker who died young. Grandpa often told me how he worked 3 jobs to put himself through community college, then built his first software company in his garage in the early 1980s. By the time I was born, Charles Henry Smith was a tech industry legend worth hundreds of millions. By the time I graduated college, his innovations in cloud computing had pushed his worth to $800 million. Our connection began when I was just 7 years old. My artistic tendencies emerged early, and while my parents dismissed my drawings as childish nonsense, Grandpa Charles saw something different. He would visit every Sunday, and without fail, he would ask to see my newest creations. He hung my watercolor of our family lake trip in his office, not in some back hallway, but right behind his desk where important business people would see it. When I asked him why, he simply said, "Because it reminds me of what matters, Jill Bean." That lake house became our special place. Every Saturday morning, Grandpa would pick me up in his modest sedan. For a billionaire, he had surprisingly simple tastes, driving the same car for 10 years and wearing the same style of button-down shirts until they wore out. At the lake house, he taught me to fish, to build campfires, and as I got older, to understand business. He explained complex concepts in ways that made sense, using lake metaphors that still guide my thinking today. "Business is like this lake, Jill," he once told me while skipping stones across the water. Everyone sees the surface and thinks they understand it, but real success comes from understanding the currents underneath, the things most people never bother to observe. My parents' relationship with Grandpa Charles grew increasingly strained over the years. They constantly asked for money, not just for necessities, but for luxuries. A bigger house in a more prestigious neighborhood. Private school tuition they could have afforded if they managed their money properly. Investment capital for get-rich-quick schemes Dad discovered. Each time, Grandpa would patiently explain why their approach was flawed, offering to help them budget or learn investing basics instead. This only made them resentful. I remember overhearing a particularly heated argument when I was 15. My father, red-faced and indignant, was demanding a loan of $200,000 to invest in a friend's restaurant venture. "You have more money than you could spend in 10 lifetimes, Dad," my father shouted. "Why are you so stingy with your own son?" Grandpa Charles remained calm. "William, I earned every dollar through hard work and careful decisions. I would be doing you a disservice by funding ventures you haven't properly researched. That restaurant concept is fundamentally flawed." "You just want to control everything," Dad shot back. "You think I'm not good enough to succeed on my own?" That's not it at all," Grandpa replied sadly. "I want you to know the satisfaction of building something yourself, something that lasts." The conversation ended with my father storming out, and the visits became less frequent after that. By the time I was in college studying art, my parents had nearly cut ties with Grandpa completely. They would only reconnect when they needed something, which became increasingly common as their financial situation deteriorated, despite their growing incomes. After college, I established myself as an independent artist in the city. My one-bedroom apartment was small, but filled with light, perfect for my painting studio in the corner. I sold enough pieces to get by, supplementing my income with graphic design work. I was never rich, but I was doing what I loved, which was wealth enough for me. Throughout my adult years, I maintained my relationship with Grandpa Charles. We had lunch every Wednesday at a small diner he loved since before he was wealthy. The owner knew him simply as Charlie, with no idea he could buy the entire building with pocket change. We talked about everything, from art to philosophy to business trends. He never once suggested I pursue a more lucrative career, unlike my parents who constantly reminded me that art doesn't pay the bills. The last time I saw him alive was 3 weeks before the accident. We sat at our usual booth, him with his black coffee and me with my chai tea. He seemed pensive that day, watching people pass by the window. "You know, Jilly Bean," he said, using my childhood nickname, "I'm very proud of the woman you've become. You have integrity, compassion, and you create beauty in a world that needs it." "Thanks, Grandpa," I replied, touched by his sudden sentimentality. "I want you to know I've taken care of you," he continued, his voice growing serious. "No matter what happens, you'll be okay." I assumed he meant he had set up some small trust fund to help support my art, perhaps enough to buy a small studio space or fund a gallery showing. I had no idea what he really meant, or that this cryptic conversation would be our last. The call came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was mixing paints for a commissioned piece when my phone lit up with my mother's number. She rarely called unless she wanted something, so I almost didn't answer. Something made me pick up. "Jill," she said, her voice unusually tight, "your grandfather's helicopter went down over Puget Sound. They found the wreckage an hour ago. He's gone." The world seemed to stop. The paintbrush slipped from my fingers, splattering blue across the floor like tears. I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Grandpa Charles, the steady rock in my life, was gone. He had been returning from a business meeting in Portland when his private helicopter encountered severe turbulence and crashed into the water. No survivors. The funeral was held 5 days later at Grandpa's estate. I hadn't been to the mansion in years, as our meetings always took place at the lake house or the diner. The grand home felt cold and impersonal compared to the warm spaces I associated with him. Hundreds of people attended, from tech industry leaders to politicians to celebrities. Most of them had never heard the stories of Idaho or seen him smile while baiting a fishing hook. Throughout the service, I observed my family's behavior with growing discomfort. My father spent most of the eulogy staring at his phone, occasionally typing notes with furrowed brows. I later glimpsed his screen and saw he was calculating estate values and tax implications before Grandpa was even in the ground. My mother worked the room like a networking event, exchanging cards with wealthy mourners and mentioning her real estate business at inappropriate moments. My Uncle Ethan huddled with cousins in corners, whispering about properties and assets. I caught phrases like, "The lake property must be worth $7 million easy," and "That art collection alone could set us all up for life." None of them mentioned Charles's philanthropic work, his mentorship of young entrepreneurs, or his quiet kindness to everyday people. I sat alone in the front row, genuinely grieving the man who had seen value in me when others hadn't. I clutched a small stone from the lake, one that Grandpa had given me decades ago because its speckled surface looked like the night sky painted by a master artist. This small token meant more to me than any mansion or bank account. After the service, Nathan Katz, Grandpa's lawyer and friend of 40 years, gathered the family in Charles's wood-paneled study. Nathan was a tall, thin man with silver hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to assess your character with each glance. He had a leather portfolio under his arm and a solemn expression. "Thank you all for coming," he began formally. Charles left explicit instructions for the reading of his will immediately following the service. He wanted clarity for the family, without delay. The room tensed with anticipation. 12 family members leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the portfolio. My parents sat directly across from me, my mother's hand squeezing my father's arm so tightly her knuckles were white. "I'll dispense with the legal preamble," Nathan continued, adjusting his glasses. "Charles Henry Smith revised his will 6 months ago with sound mind and full legal compliance." He paused, scanning the room before his eyes settled on me. The entirety of Charles Henry Smith's estate, including all business interests, properties, investments, and liquid assets totaling approximately $800 million, is bequeathed to his granddaughter, Jill Reynolds. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. Then chaos erupted. "This is preposterous," my father shouted, jumping to his feet. "I'm his son, his only child." My mother recovered enough to attempt damage control. "There must be some mistake," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "Jill, sweetheart, you're overwhelmed. Let us help sort this out." Uncle Ethan began citing legal precedents for contesting wills, while my cousins stared at me with naked hostility. Aunt Meredith burst into theatrical tears, lamenting how poor Charles must have been manipulated in his final days. Nathan raised a hand, silencing the room with the authority of a man who had managed billionaires' affairs for decades. "Mr. Smith anticipated your reaction. He left a video message to be played at this precise moment." He produced a tablet and set it on the desk. The screen illuminated with Grandpa Charles's face, recorded in this very study, perhaps months ago. Seeing him alive again, even just on video, made my heart ache. "If you're watching this," he began, his familiar voice filling the room, "then I'm gone. And Nathan has just told you about my decision." I imagine there's quite an uproar. His eyes twinkled with that knowing look I recognized so well. I want to explain my reasoning. Throughout my life, I've watched how people react to wealth. Money doesn't change people. It reveals them. For years, I've observed how each of you approaches life, success, failure, and relationships. He paused, taking a breath. Jill alone has demonstrated the values I cherish: integrity, compassion, the courage to forge her own path. She visits not for what she can get, but for what we can share. While others saw me as a bank account, she saw me as a person. My father made a dismissive sound, but Grandpa continued as if he could hear the interruption. "William, you're my son, and I've always loved you. But you've never understood that wealth without character is worthless. You've spent your life taking shortcuts, expecting rewards without effort. Patricia, you've encouraged this mindset, always reaching for status rather than substance." The recording continued, addressing each family member with specific examples of their behavior over the years. It was uncomfortable but fair, without malice yet unflinching in its assessment. Finally, he returned to me. "Jill will face pressure from all of you. You'll claim she doesn't deserve this inheritance, that she manipulated me, that she can't handle the responsibility. You're wrong. I've been preparing her since she was 7 years old, teaching her values more valuable than any business strategy. I trust her to carry forward not just my wealth, but my vision for what that wealth can accomplish in the world. The video ended with his gentle smile. "Remember what matters, Jill Bean." But they had no idea what was coming next. Grandpa Charles had spent years preparing for exactly this moment. The room erupted once more after the video ended, but I barely heard the shouts and accusations. In my mind, I was back at the lake house, learning to skip stones across still water, understanding for the first time what Grandpa had really been teaching me all those years. Nathan cleared the room efficiently, citing Charles's instructions for the family to have private time to process the information. As the non-family associates filed out, my relatives circled me, like predators who had cornered vulnerable prey. We gathered in the grand living room, with its wall of windows overlooking Puget Sound, the same waters that had claimed Grandpa's life. My mother was the first to approach, her tactics shifting from indignation to maternal manipulation. Tears welled in her eyes as she took the seat beside me, reaching for my hands. I noticed she had already removed her funeral black gloves, revealing her perfectly manicured nails and diamond tennis bracelet that had mysteriously appeared despite their supposed financial struggles. "Darling," she began, her voice trembling in a performance worthy of an award, "I know this is overwhelming for you. Your grandfather clearly wasn't thinking clearly in his final months." She squeezed my hands. "But you know what the right thing to do is. This money belongs to the entire family. Your father is Charles's son, after all." Before I could respond, my father stepped forward. His approach was markedly different. Where my mother chose manipulation, he opted for intimidation. He loomed over me, still standing while everyone else sat, a power move he often used in family disputes. "This is my birthright," he declared, his voice tight with controlled rage. "I spent 45 years as that man's son. I endured his criticism, his impossible standards, his constant judgment. And now he does this?" He slammed his fist on the antique coffee table, causing everyone to jump. "You will sign over the inheritance, Jill. All of it. I've already called our lawyers." Uncle Ethan, always the family intellectual, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Jill, be reasonable. You're an artist with no business experience. Charles built a complex corporate empire requiring sophisticated management. You don't have the expertise to handle such responsibility. For the sake of his legacy and the thousands of employees depending on proper leadership, the assets should be managed by those with appropriate credentials." My cousin Diana, always the chameleon, tried a different approach. She slid onto the couch on my other side, putting a gentle arm around my shoulders. "We all love you, Jill," she said softly, though we had barely spoken in years. "No one is saying you shouldn't get anything. We just want what's fair for everyone. Maybe we can work out percentages that make sense. Perhaps 10% for you, since you were close to Grandpa. That's still over $80 million, more than enough for someone with your simple lifestyle." The suggestions continued from all sides, growing increasingly transparent in their greed. My aunt suggested I couldn't possibly want the stress of managing properties. My younger cousins reminded me of family vacations from 15 years ago as evidence of our close bond worthy of financial recognition. Even distant relatives I barely recognized chimed in with their opinions on fair distribution. Throughout it all, I remained silent, watching and listening, as Grandpa had taught me to do. "The first reaction is rarely the most honest," he once told me. "Wait until people reveal their true intentions before you show your hand." After nearly an hour of their combined pressure, accusations, and false concern, I finally spoke. The room quieted immediately, all eyes fixed on me, waiting for my capitulation. "I've listened to all of you," I began quietly, "and I've learned a lot in the past hour. Specifically, I've learned that none of you knew Grandpa Charles at all. I stood up, needing to physically distance myself from their suffocating presence. Dad, when was the last time you visited him without asking for money? Mom, can you name his favorite book? Uncle Ethan, did you know he volunteered teaching coding to kids in underprivileged schools every Thursday? Diana, did you ever once call him on his birthday? Their faces registered varying degrees of surprise and discomfort. I continued, gaining confidence with each word. For the past 15 years, I've had lunch with Grandpa every Wednesday. Not because he was rich, but because he was wise, funny, and genuinely interested in my life. He taught me about business, yes, but more importantly, he taught me about integrity. My father's face darkened. So that's how you manipulated him. Weekly lunches to ensure you were in the will. Very clever, Jill. I didn't think you had it in you. That's not what happened, I replied calmly. I never asked for anything, never expected this inheritance. But now that he's entrusted me with it, I intend to honor his wishes. You ungrateful little... my father began, before my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. What your father means, she interjected smoothly, is that this decision affects the entire family. Your grandfather wasn't thinking clearly. We can contest the will, claim undue influence. It would be messy, public, and dragged through courts for years. My father regained his composure, straightening his tie in a gesture I recognized from childhood, a signal he was about to deliver an ultimatum. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to call Nathan tomorrow and initiate the transfer of all assets to me, as should have been done in the first place. If you do this promptly, you can remain part of this family. If you refuse... His eyes narrowed. You're on your own. Permanently. The room went silent again. The threat hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. They expected me to crumble under the weight of potentially losing my family. Perhaps the old Jill would have. The Jill who sought approval and avoided conflict. But sitting in Grandpa Charles's house, with his voice still echoing in my mind, I found strength I didn't know I had. I'm sorry you feel that way, I said, meeting my father's gaze steadily. But I won't betray Grandpa's trust. He made this decision for reasons he explained quite clearly. I intend to honor them. The facade of family unity shattered completely. My mother's sympathetic mask fell away, replaced by cold fury. You think you're special because Charles favored you. You were a project for him, nothing more. A distraction in his old age. You've always been selfish, my father added, his voice rising. Living in your fantasy art world while the rest of us deal with reality. You think you can run an $800 million empire? You'll destroy everything he built within a year. Cousin Diana withdrew her arm from my shoulders as if I'd suddenly become contagious. Uncle Ethan began texting furiously, no doubt contacting his lawyer friends. The younger cousins whispered among themselves, shooting me venomous glances. My mother delivered the final blow, standing to face me with years of resentment in her expression. You were never really part of this family anyway. Always the odd one out. Always in your own world. If this is your choice, don't expect us to welcome you back when you inevitably fail. My father checked his watch, a dismissive gesture signaling the end of his patience. You have until midnight to pack your things from our house. Since you're so wealthy now, you can find your own place to live. Don't bother coming home if you don't change your mind. With that ultimatum delivered, they began filing out of the room, a procession of disappointed faces and muttered threats. No one looked back. No one hesitated. In the span of an hour, I had gone from family member to family outcast, all because I refused to give them what they believed they deserved without earning it. Standing alone in Grandpa Charles's living room, watching the sunset color the same waters that had claimed his life. I felt a strange mixture of loss and liberation. I had lost my family, yes, but perhaps I had lost only the illusion of family. And in its place, I had gained something Grandpa valued above all else: the chance to stand on my own principles, regardless of the cost. Midnight found me in my childhood bedroom, surrounded by cardboard boxes and trash bags hastily filled with my belongings. My parents had left the house immediately after returning from the mansion, apparently unable to bear my presence now that I had defied them. They left a terse note on the kitchen counter. "Lock the door when you leave. Return the key through mail slot." 27 years reduced to whatever I could pack in my compact car. I moved methodically, trying to focus on the practical task rather than the emotional weight of what was happening. Clothes, art supplies, books, the essentials came first. Then came the harder decisions about what mattered from my past. In the back of my closet, I found a shoebox I had nearly forgotten. Inside were treasures from my time with Grandpa Charles: a polished stone from the lake, a handwritten recipe for his famous blueberry pancakes, photos of us fishing and building sandcastles and working on art projects. One picture particularly caught my attention: me at about 9 years old, sitting on Grandpa's shoulders at a county fair, both of us laughing with identical expressions of joy. I carefully wrapped it in a sweater and placed it in my essentials box. As I continued packing, I found a birthday card he had given me when I turned 21. Inside, past the generic printed message, he had written, "Integrity is doing the right thing, even when no one is watching. But remember, Jilly Bean, someone is always watching. Yourself. Live so you can face your reflection without regret." At the time, it had seemed like typical grandpa wisdom. Now, it felt like a message sent forward in time precisely for this moment. By 11:30, my car was packed to the ceiling with barely enough space for me to see out the rear window. I stood in the empty bedroom one last time, walls bare where my art had hung, closet empty of clothes. This room had never fully expressed who I was anyway, decorated according to my mother's tastes rather than mine. Still, saying goodbye to the only home I'd known until college left a hollow feeling in my chest. I placed the house key on the kitchen counter beside their note, adding nothing of my own. What was there to say? They had made their choice, and I had made mine. As I pulled out of the driveway for the last time, I realized I had nowhere to go. My apartment was too small to accommodate all my belongings, and it was too late to call friends. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself dialing Nathan Katz's number. It was nearly midnight, but he answered on the second ring, his voice alert, as if he'd been expecting my call. "Jill," he said simply, "how can I help you?" "They kicked me out," I replied, my voice catching slightly. "I have my car full of stuff and nowhere to go." There was a brief pause before he answered. "Charles anticipated this possibility. The mansion is yours now, as are all the properties. I can meet you there in 30 minutes with the keys and security codes." "You don't sound surprised," I noted, turning my car toward the waterfront area where Grandpa's mansion stood. "Charles knew his family well," Nathan replied with audible resignation. "He predicted exactly how they would react if you didn't comply with their demands. There's more you need to know, but not over the phone. I'll see you soon." The drive to the mansion felt surreal. I had visited occasionally as a child, but always as a guest. Now I was arriving as the owner. The gate attendant recognized me immediately. "Good evening, Miss Reynolds," he said with a respectful nod. Mr. Katz called ahead. "Welcome home." Home. The word echoed strangely in my mind as I drove up the winding driveway. This enormous property had never been my home. I wasn't even sure it had been Grandpa's home in any real sense. He had always seemed most himself at the lake house or the diner. Nathan was waiting on the front steps, a small leather case in his hands. He looked tired but resolute in the security lighting. "You don't need to unpack everything tonight," he said practically. "Just take what you need for the next few days. The rest can wait until tomorrow." He walked me through the mansion's security systems, showing me how to operate the gates, cameras, and alarms. He provided a folder with codes, accounts, and emergency contacts. Everything was meticulously organized, as if Grandpa had prepared for this exact scenario. "Charles's suite is on the east wing, second floor," Nathan explained. "But there are 6 other bedrooms prepared for use. Choose whichever you prefer." After he left, I stood in the cavernous entryway, my footsteps echoing on marble floors. The house was beautiful, but felt like a museum, pristine and impersonal. I carried a small overnight bag upstairs, choosing a guest room rather than presuming to take Grandpa's suite. Even with legal ownership, that felt like an intimacy I wasn't ready for. Sleep eluded me despite my exhaustion. Around 3 a.m, I gave up trying and decided to explore the house. My footsteps echoed through empty hallways as I wandered from room to room. Formal dining room with seating for 20. Library with first editions behind glass. Home theater, gym, wine cellar. Spaces designed to impress rather than comfort. Eventually, I found myself drawn to Grandpa's study, the room where the will had been read hours earlier. Unlike the rest of the mansion, this space felt genuinely his. Photos lined the bookshelves, many featuring me at various ages. His collection of unique stones and fossils, books well worn from actual reading rather than display. I sat in his leather chair, running my fingers over the desk where he had made decisions affecting thousands of lives. My hand brushed against something underneath. A small key taped to the underside of the desk drawer. Nearly invisible unless you were looking for it. Curious, I tried it in various locks until a small panel in the bookshelf clicked open, revealing a hidden compartment containing a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's distinctive handwriting. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal. "My dearest Jill," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then several things have happened. I've passed on, you've inherited everything, and the family has reacted exactly as I predicted they would. I'm sorry for the pain this has caused you, but I'm not sorry for my decision." The letter continued, explaining in detail why he had chosen me, not just because of our bond, but because he had been quietly testing and preparing me for years. Those business discussions at the lake house, the philosophical questions over lunch, even watching how I handled my struggling art career without asking for bailouts, all of it had been his way of assessing my character. "The family will try to take everything from you," he warned. "They'll use legal challenges, emotional manipulation, and public pressure. They may even try to portray you as mentally unstable or claim you coerced me. I've prepared for all of these possibilities." The final paragraphs contained specific instructions. "In the morning, call Jackson Morris, my head of security. The number is in your folder. Tell him the oak tree stands firm in the storm. He'll understand and will bring you everything you need. Trust him completely." The letter ended with words that brought tears to my eyes. "You are stronger than you know, Jilly Bean. I wouldn't have entrusted you with this responsibility if I wasn't absolutely certain you could handle it. When others show you who they are, believe them, and remember what matters." It was signed simply, "With love and faith, Grandpa Charles." I sat in his chair until dawn broke over the sound, the letter clutched in my hand. As the first rays of sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a strange calm settled over me. The enormity of what lay ahead was still overwhelming, but for the first time since the will reading, I felt a sense of purpose. Grandpa Charles had trusted me with his legacy. Not just his money, but his values. He believed I was strong enough to weather this storm. And sitting in his chair, surrounded by the artifacts of his remarkable life, I made a promise to myself and to him. I would not let him down. As morning fully arrived, I picked up the phone and dialed Jackson Morris's number, ready to speak the phrase that would set in motion whatever contingency plan Grandpa had prepared for me. Ready to stand firm in the storm that was surely coming. I awoke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the persistent buzz of my phone. Momentarily disoriented, I reached for it and was immediately bombarded with notifications. 17 missed calls from my parents, 23 text messages from various family members, ranging from pleading to threatening, and several news alerts with variations of the headline, "Tech billionaire leaves fortune to estranged granddaughter. Family contests will." So much for privacy. Someone had leaked the details to the press already. I scrolled through the texts briefly, their content predictable. "You've made a terrible mistake. Call us immediately." That was Mom. "This isn't over. Our lawyers are preparing documents." Dad's contribution. "Think about the family reputation. Uncle Ethan trying a different angle." "We can still work something out before this gets ugly," Cousin Diana maintaining her false concern. As I was reading, the phone rang again. Nathan Ketz's name flashed on the screen. "Turn on the financial news," he said without preamble when I answered. I fumbled for the remote and switched on the bedroom television, finding the business channel. My breath caught as I saw my father on screen, standing at a podium with my mother and Uncle Ethan flanking him. A press conference was already in progress. "I'm concerned for my daughter's well-being," he was saying, his expression a perfect mask of paternal worry. "My father's decision came as a shock to everyone, including Jill. She's an artist, not a business person, and the stress of this situation has overwhelmed her. We're seeking a psychological evaluation and temporary conservatorship until she's stable enough to make rational decisions about the estate." The camera panned to my mother, who dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "We just want what's best for Jill, and for Charles's legacy. This isn't about money. It's about family responsibility." I muted the television, feeling physically ill. "They're claiming I'm mentally unstable," I said, "that I can't make my own decisions." "It's a common tactic," Nathan replied grimly. "If they can get a temporary conservatorship, they could potentially override your control of the assets before we fully transfer everything to your name." Charles anticipated this move. "Did you contact Jackson yet?" "I was about to when you called," I said, still staring at the silent images of my family, pretending concern while undermining me completely. "Do it immediately," Nathan urged, "and don't leave the property today. I've received word they're planning to arrive with police, claiming you're trespassing. They'll argue the will hasn't been fully executed yet, so the property isn't legally yours." "Can they do that?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "They can try," he replied. But Charles put safeguards in place. "Call Jackson now." As soon as I hung up, I dialed the number Grandpa had left for Jackson Morris. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, measured voice answered. "Morris." "This is Jill Reynolds," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "My grandfather told me to call you and say—" I hesitated, feeling slightly foolish. "The oak tree stands firm in the storm." There was a brief silence before Jackson replied, his tone shifting immediately. "Miss Reynolds, I've been waiting for your call." "Are you at the mansion?" "Yes. Stay there. I'm 20 minutes out. Don't open the gates for anyone but me." Black SUV. License plate HR7240. True to his word, exactly 20 minutes later, security cameras showed a black SUV approaching the gate. Jackson Morris was a surprise. From his voice and title, I had imagined someone like the stern security professionals who occasionally accompanied Grandpa to public events. Instead, the man who strode up the front steps was in his early 40s with kind eyes that contrasted with his military bearing. He carried a secure briefcase in one hand and a tablet in the other. "Miss Reynolds," he greeted me formally. "I served as your grandfather's head of security for 11 years. More importantly, I was his friend. He spoke of you often." Once inside, Jackson wasted no time. "Your family is mobilizing quickly. They've scheduled their press conference, which you saw, and they'll arrive here afterward with law enforcement, claiming you've taken unauthorized possession of the property." My hands shook slightly as I poured coffee for both of us. Mr. Katz mentioned that. "What do we do?" Jackson placed his briefcase on the kitchen table and entered a complex code to unlock it. Charles prepared extensively for this scenario. For the past 5 years, he's been documenting your family's behavior, particularly your father's business dealings. He removed a series of folders and a secure hard drive. Your father attempted to access proprietary technology from your grandfather's company 3 years ago. He planned to sell it to competitors. Charles caught him, but kept the evidence private, not wanting a public scandal. That was when he began to seriously reconsider his succession planning. I sank into a chair, processing this new information. My father tried to steal from Grandpa? That and more, Jackson confirmed grimly. Your parents have also misrepresented their financial situation for years. Despite claiming hardship, they maintain multiple properties and offshore accounts. They've received over $7 million from Charles in the past decade alone, most of which was spent on luxury items, rather than the investments or necessities they claimed. He connected the hard drive to his tablet and turned it to show me. Charles collected surveillance footage, financial records, emails, and recorded conversations, all documenting a pattern of deception. Everything obtained legally, I should add. He was meticulous about that. My head was spinning. Why would he keep giving them money if he knew they were lying? Jackson's expression softened. He hoped they would change, and he didn't want to lose his connection to his son completely. Charles was a brilliant businessman, but still human. He had blind spots when it came to family. Over the next hour, Jackson laid out the full scope of Grandpa's contingency plan. He had assembled a team loyal to me: security personnel, PR specialists, the existing executive management of his companies, and a legal team separate from the family's usual lawyers. Everyone has been briefed on the situation, Jackson explained. The company leadership received personal letters from Charles explaining his decision. They're prepared to work with you, rather than your father. My phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. They're on their way with police. ETA 30 minutes. Jackson saw the message and nodded. Perfect timing. The team is already in position. He made a quick call, speaking in clipped, professional tones. Initiate Protocol Oakwood. All personnel in position in 20. When he hung up, he turned to me with unexpected gentleness. Miss Reynolds, Charles believed in you. Completely. He knew this moment would come, and he made sure you wouldn't face it alone. Are you ready? For a moment, I felt overwhelmed by it all. 24 hours ago, I was a struggling artist living in a small apartment. Now, I was the center of a family war over billions, with teams and protocols named after my childhood nickname. Then I remembered Grandpa's letter. The oak tree stands firm in the storm. He believed I was strong enough. And looking at the evidence of how thoroughly he had prepared to protect me, I found my resolve strengthening. I'm ready, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. Then let's prepare to receive your family, Jackson said. The security monitors showed a procession arriving at the front gate. 3 luxury cars containing my family members, 2 police vehicles, and bringing up the rear, a local news van, clearly tipped off about the confrontation about to unfold. They brought media, Jackson noted dispassionately, watching the monitors. As expected. Through the cameras, I could see my father gesturing emphatically to a police officer, pointing toward the house. My mother stood beside him, perfectly positioned to be captured by the news cameras. Her expression a practiced blend of concern and determination. Uncle Ethan appeared to be explaining something to another officer, documents in hand. "They're claiming the mansion isn't legally yours yet," Jackson explained. "They'll argue you're trespassing and attempt to have you removed while the will is contested." "Will the police actually remove me?" I asked, anxiety building. "No, Nathan has filed all the necessary paperwork. The property transferred to your name immediately upon the reading of the will. But they're counting on confusion and the appearance of authority to pressure you." He checked his watch. "It's time. Are you ready to meet them?" I smoothed my simple blouse and took a deep breath. As ready as I'll ever be. "Remember, you have the legal and moral high ground," Jackson reminded me. "Stay calm, regardless of what they say or do. Everything is in place." I nodded, and Jackson spoke into his communication device. "Open the gates. Allow all vehicles through." The procession made its way up the long driveway, parking in a semicircle before the grand entrance. Cameras were already rolling as my family emerged from their vehicles, the police hanging back slightly, clearly uncomfortable with the media presence. "Let them come to you," Jackson advised. "Stand at the top of the steps. Height advantage is psychological advantage." I positioned myself as suggested, Jackson a respectful step behind me. Within moments, my family approached, my father leading the charge up the stairs with surprising speed for a man in his 60s. "Jill," he called loudly, clearly playing to the cameras. "This has gone far enough. You're not well, and we're here to help you." "I'm perfectly well, Dad," I replied evenly, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "Though I appreciate your sudden concern for my welfare." My mother stepped forward, arm linked with my father's in a show of unity I knew to be entirely fabricated. "Darling, this is all so overwhelming. You're an artist, not a business executive. Your grandfather's decision has put enormous pressure on you. We're just trying to help manage things until you're more stable." The police officers approached cautiously, one of them addressing me. "Ma'am, we have a complaint about unauthorized occupancy of this property while ownership is in dispute." Before I could respond, Nathan Katz emerged from the mansion, legal documents in hand. "Officers, I'm Nathan Katz, executor of Charles Henry Smith's estate. I can confirm Miss Reynolds is the legal owner of this property as of yesterday afternoon. All documentation has been filed with the county. There is no dispute about ownership from a legal standpoint." He handed the papers to the officers. My father's face flushed with anger. "The will is being contested. She has no right to occupy the premises until the court rules on our petition." "That's not how inheritance law works, Mr. Reynolds," Nathan replied calmly. "A contested will doesn't freeze assets or property access. The executor's duties proceed unless a court specifically orders otherwise. No such order exists." The officers reviewed the documents, clearly realizing they'd been drawn into a family dispute rather than a legitimate legal issue. The senior officer spoke into his radio before addressing us. "The documentation appears in order. This is a civil matter, not criminal. We have no grounds to remove Miss Reynolds from the property." My father's carefully constructed facade began to crack. "This is absurd. I'm Charles Henry Smith's son. This house should be mine." "Your father made his wishes perfectly clear," I said quietly. "As did you when you kicked me out of your house last night." The news crew had inched closer, capturing every word. My mother, ever aware of appearances, placed a restraining hand on my father's arm. "William, please, not here." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Jill, we have proof that your grandfather changed his will under suspicious circumstances. We have an earlier will naming your father as the primary heir. She gestured to Uncle Ethan, who stepped forward with an official-looking document. This will from 3 years ago tells a very different story, Uncle Ethan declared. We believe Charles was manipulated in his final months. Nathan examined the document briefly before looking up with an expression of profound disappointment. This document appears authentic on first glance, however, I have concerns about its provenance. Charles Henry Smith signed all legal documents with his fountain pen, using a specific ink he had custom made. This signature uses standard blue ink. My father dismissed this with a wave. That's hardly definitive. The point is, there was an earlier will with very different terms. We have video of the signing of the current will, Jackson interjected smoothly. Charles was of completely sound mind, as attested by 2 physicians and a psychiatrist present at the signing. We also have, he paused significantly, footage of what appears to be Mr. William Reynolds entering his father's study, unauthorized, 2 months ago, accessing private files. My father's expression changed instantly. What are you talking about? What footage? Instead of answering directly, Jackson pressed a button on his tablet. The massive outdoor screens that Grandpa had installed for summer movie nights flickered to life, visible to everyone present, including the news crew. Crystal clear security footage showed my father entering Grandpa's study late at night, searching through desk drawers, and attempting to access his computer. This is an invasion of privacy. My father sputtered as the footage continued, now showing him photographing documents with his phone. The security system in Charles Henry Smith's home operated with full disclosure to all who entered, Jackson replied calmly. There were notices posted at every entrance. The footage shifted to a different date, showing my father in conversation with unknown men in an upscale restaurant. Audio accompanied the video. I can get you the proprietary algorithms, my father's voice stated clearly. Once my father is out of the picture, I'll have full access. The old man's health isn't what it used to be. My mother's perfectly composed facade crumbled as she stared at the screen in horror. The police officers who had been preparing to leave paused with renewed interest. There are hundreds of hours of similar recordings, Jackson continued. Charles Henry Smith documented a pattern of corporate espionage attempts, financial misrepresentations, and even discussions of ways to have him declared mentally incompetent before his death. Turning to the stunned officers, he added, We weren't planning to pursue criminal charges out of respect for family privacy. However, since Mr. Reynolds has brought law enforcement into this situation, we're prepared to provide all evidence of potential criminal activity to the proper authorities. The senior officer's demeanor shifted completely. Sir, we may need to ask you some questions about the allegations being made. As my father attempted to explain away the damning footage, the mansion doors opened once more. A group of distinguished individuals emerged, positioning themselves behind me in a show of support. I recognized several from photos in Grandpa's office. His chief financial officer, the head of his charitable foundation, his longtime business partners. We are the executive leadership of Reynolds Technologies and the Reynolds Foundation, the CFO announced. Charles personally informed each of us of his succession plans. We stand unanimously behind Jill Reynolds as his chosen heir and the new chairperson of the board. The news crew was capturing everything, the reporter barely containing her excitement at the unfolding drama. My family's planned media narrative was collapsing spectacularly as the evidence of their deception mounted. This isn't over, my father hissed, but the threat sounded hollow even to his own ears. The police were now taking notes, their attention fully focused on him rather than me. Actually, William, Nathan said quietly, I believe it is. Charles suspected you might attempt something like this. He was working with federal authorities for the past year regarding your approaches to competitors with proprietary information. They've been building a case independently of anything we've shown today. As if on cue, two plainclothes individuals approached from one of the unmarked cars that had arrived with Jackson's security team. They displayed badges identifying them as federal agents. "Mr. Reynolds," one of them said formally, "we'd like to ask you some questions regarding potential violations of corporate espionage statutes and intellectual property theft. Would you be willing to accompany us to our office?" My father's face drained of color. The carefully orchestrated confrontation had transformed into his worst nightmare. The family members who had been so unified in their outrage minutes before began to distance themselves physically from him, recognizing the sinking ship. The federal agents led my father toward their vehicle, assuring him he wasn't under arrest, but was needed for questioning. My mother stood frozen on the steps, her social standing crumbling before her eyes, as cameras captured every moment. "Mrs. Reynolds," Jackson said quietly, "I suggest you consult with independent legal counsel immediately. The documentation we have indicates you were aware of your husband's activities." She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. Whatever she saw in my expression made her shoulders slump in defeat. Without another word, she turned and walked down the steps, following the path my father had just taken. As my family retreated in disarray, I remained standing at the top of the stairs, surrounded by the team Grandpa Charles had assembled to protect me. The news crew was already broadcasting live, the narrative completely reversed from what my family had intended. The storm had come, just as Grandpa predicted, but the oak tree remained standing, stronger than anyone, perhaps even I, had expected. The weeks following the dramatic confrontation at the mansion unfolded like pages turning in a story I was both living and observing. The media coverage shifted overnight from entitled granddaughter steals family fortune to billion-dollar betrayal, son plotted against tech titan father. Financial news outlets detailed the corporate espionage allegations, while tabloids breathlessly recounted the family drama. Through it all, Nathan and Jackson managed the public relations aspects, allowing me to adjust to my new reality in relative privacy. My father faced serious legal troubles. The federal investigation uncovered multiple instances where he had attempted to sell Grandpa's proprietary technology to competitors. The authorities also discovered tax evasion schemes and evidence of other financial crimes stretching back nearly a decade. While he avoided jail time through a plea agreement, the financial penalties and professional disgrace were substantial. His name became synonymous with corporate betrayal in tech industry circles. My mother, ever the pragmatist, filed for divorce within a month, distancing herself from the scandal. She attempted to reconcile with me once, suggesting tearfully over the phone that families should stick together in difficult times. When I gently declined her sudden interest in rebuilding our relationship, her true motivations became clear. "You could at least help with my legal fees," she snapped, before hanging up. I never heard from her again. Extended family members divided into camps. Some reached out with transparently self-serving overtures of reconciliation, usually when they needed something. Others maintained that I had somehow masterminded the entire situation, manipulating an old man and framing my father. I let them all fade into the background of my new life, neither pursuing relationships nor harboring resentment. As Grandpa had written, when people show you who they are, believe them. The initial victory brought little joy, only a profound sense of loneliness. I had the keys to a financial kingdom, but had lost the only family I'd ever known. The mansion, for all its grandeur, echoed with emptiness. I found myself wandering its halls at night, questioning whether I could possibly live up to Grandpa's faith in me. "It's normal to feel overwhelmed," Nathan assured me during our daily briefings. "Charles didn't expect you to master everything overnight. That's why he assembled this team." Gradually, I began to understand the true extent of Grandpa's business empire and philanthropic activities. Reynolds Technologies employed over 4,000 people across 7 countries. The Reynolds Foundation funded educational programs that had helped thousands of underprivileged students attend college. His venture capital fund had launched dozens of startups focused on sustainable energy and healthcare innovation. The responsibility was enormous, but I approached it the same way I approached my art, with patience, attention to detail, and a willingness to learn. I didn't pretend to understand everything immediately. Instead, I listened to the experts Grandpa had selected, asked questions without fear of appearing ignorant, and made decisions based on principles rather than profit margins alone. My first major initiative came 3 months after inheriting the fortune. I established the Charles Henry Smith Arts Fellowship, providing financial support to emerging artists while they developed their craft. The program specifically targeted talented individuals from backgrounds similar to mine, people who had vision but lacked connections or financial backing. The application form included an essay question about integrity and creating work with purpose, values Grandpa had instilled in me. Within weeks, applications poured in from across the country. Reading their stories, young artists struggling against the same doubts and financial pressures I had faced, gave me the first real sense that I was honoring Grandpa's legacy in a meaningful way. As summer turned to fall, I found myself spending more time at the lake house than the mansion. There, surrounded by memories of fishing lessons and stone-skipping contests, I felt closer to Grandpa's spirit. I converted one of the bedrooms into a studio, where natural light streamed through windows overlooking the water. I began painting again, creating my first new works since the inheritance drama began. The executive team was surprised when I announced my intention to maintain my artistic practice alongside my business responsibilities. "Charles always said you were an artist first and foremost," Nathan remarked. "He believed your creative perspective would bring fresh vision to the companies." Gradually, I discovered unexpected allies within Grandpa's organization. His executive assistant, Margaret, shared stories of how he would proudly show her photos of my latest exhibitions. The groundskeeper at the lake property remembered how Grandpa had installed special lighting in the boathouse, specifically for me to paint there during rainy days. His driver recalled long conversations where Charles would discuss my potential, seeing qualities in me I hadn't recognized in myself. He was preparing for this transition for years, Margaret told me over coffee one morning. Watching you, testing you in small ways, making sure you had the character to handle wealth without being corrupted by it. The money was never the most important inheritance to him. By the 1-year anniversary of Grandpa's death, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. I divided my time between art and business, bringing creativity to corporate decisions and discipline to my artistic practice. The companies thrived under the leadership team Grandpa had assembled, with my guidance focusing on ethical innovation rather than merely maximizing profits. On that anniversary, I visited his grave alone, bringing a small smooth stone from the lake rather than elaborate flowers. The simple headstone, which he had specified in his will, bore only his name, dates, and the phrase, "What matters endures." "I understand now," I said quietly, as I placed the stone atop the granite. The money wasn't the real inheritance. It was the lessons all along. I told him about the Arts Fellowship, about maintaining his charitable commitments while adding new initiatives focused on arts education in underserved communities. I described the painting series I was working on, inspired by our lake house conversations, and I confessed my ongoing struggles with the family rift, despite knowing I had made the right choice. The hardest part is accepting that they never really saw me, I admitted to the silent stone. They saw only what they could get from me. You taught me that wealth reveals character. It doesn't create it. They showed who they truly were when tested. As I sat beside his grave, watching clouds drift across the autumn sky. I reflected on everything I had learned in the year since inheriting the fortune. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in relationships, based on genuine connection rather than utility. Success wasn't about accumulation, but about positive impact. And family could be chosen, built around shared values, rather than merely shared DNA. I had established new connections with people who appreciated me for who I was, rather than what I could provide. Fellow artists who didn't care about my financial status, business associates who valued my perspective rather than my signature on checks. Even a tentative romantic relationship with someone who had known me before the inheritance and treated me no differently after. The path forward wasn't perfectly clear, but I no longer felt lost. Grandpa Charles had given me not just resources, but a compass to navigate by, principles that remain true regardless of bank balances or business portfolios. As I prepared to leave the cemetery, I placed my hand on the cool granite one last time. "The oak tree still stands, Grandpa," I whispered. "Stronger now, after weathering the storm." Walking back to my car, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me since the day of the will reading. The $800 million in my name brought power and responsibility, but my true inheritance was the understanding that wealth could be a tool for positive change, rather than merely a score to keep. In honoring his values, rather than simply spending his money, I had found a way to keep Grandpa Charles's most important legacy alive. What would you have done in my position? Would you have stood firm against family pressure, or tried to find a compromise? Have you ever had to choose between doing what's right and maintaining peace with family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes standing alone for what's right is worth the temporary storm. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, in life's biggest challenges, our character is revealed, not created.